There we are. Yep, it's working. Here we are again.
Live and in person.
Yep. Did you have a good vacation?
You know, I don't really take vacations, but had a
Time off.
time off.
Yeah.
Well, really didn't do much. Sit at home.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Trying to
Well,
build model airplanes.
that's easy and not much stress, is it? Yeah.
It can be. Most of them are pretty difficult to build.
Right. Well, looks like we're again. We're gonna have a Bible study. We missed everybody last week, but just needed some good downtime, and that worked out good to be with family and friends and spend some time just kind of recuperating from the stresses of life. That was kind of nice. But we're here again. We are live. We can certainly have some interaction going on here. We would love to hear from you. If you have a question you'd like to ask, we would encourage you to do that. You can call us on live, and the phone number is 317-626-5804. So you're certainly welcome to do that. We would love to invite you to come and be with us at the Westside Church of Christ. Our address is 2675 Kentucky Avenue. We are in Indianapolis, Indiana. Our zip code is 46221. And we would certainly love to have you come and worship with us and study with us and learn and grow in the grace and the knowledge of Jesus Christ, which is what we're here to do tonight. We've been studying the Olivet Discourse that can be found in Matthew, the 24th chapter, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And then, of course, John's version of it would be the extended version of it is
Book of Revelation.
Right, the book of Revelation. So that's why it's not included in his gospel, because it was written before he wrote that gospel. Of course, that's not what the traditionalists would teach you, but that is absolutely the truth and it's verifiable. But outside of spending the rest of the program talking about that, we can kind of just jump feet first into where we left off. So the last time, it's been 2 weeks ago, so you're going to have to put on your memory hats or thinking caps or whatever that works out to be.
I'm going to address an offer that we made to the futurists, to the traditionalists, the tradition who follow man's traditions in the churches. Our offer still stands. We're waiting on a quit claim deed on your house, your bank accounts, your retirement, and titles from your cars, your vehicles. Since the Lord's coming back at any time and nobody knows, you're not going to need them. So. Yeah. Yep. Send them over to the Westside Church of Christ. We haven't received one. Haven't received a car. Haven't received any bank accounts that I know of. We haven't received a quit claim deed on a home. So maybe these people
will talk about faith, huh?
Yeah, show us your faith. Yeah, let's see your faith. Sign it over to us now. We'll take care of it for you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. We got you covered.
And when the Lord comes back, then you can laugh at me in my face, but I'm still going to enjoy your house and your property. In your bank account, but show your faith. Come on, send it on over. We're waiting on it.
Right.
Nobody's taken us up on it yet.
Yeah. Speaking of offers, we did make another offer too. This offer was posted a couple weeks ago about inviting Central Indiana Church of Christ preachers and elders to engage in a public discussion on the topic. Similar wording would be that Jesus, the apostles, and Moses and the prophets all indicated that Jesus would come back in the first century to the people that he was speaking of, as he said that he would return before many of them died. So we are still waiting to hear from someone who would like to do that. Now, there were some stipulations on this. We want to engage in discourse with someone who is honorable, and really that's the bottom line. If you have intentions of just being a schoolyard bully and making your point, making a name, the brethren do not need that. They need honest, sincere discussion, and we are most certainly willing to do that. So we want to absolutely get that out there, make sure that everybody knows. And something else here that we want to make mention of, our good brother Steve reminded us to mention the lectures that are going on in Ludington, Michigan at the Church of Christ there. This is August 4th through 6th. There's also going to be a debate between Steve Bazin and Drew Leonard. So at that time. So you can get on their website and maybe hit Steve Bazin up on Facebook, and I know he's got several things posted there, the information pertaining to that. So definitely check that out. And I'll be there actually speaking one time. And they, several preachers from across the country who have come to understand the gospel truth, the first century truth, are going to be there, and we're going to be talking about this. So we'd love to have you come and be a part of that. So so check that out.
That's Ludington, Luddington, Michigan Church of Christ.
Yeah.
I went there last year. It's a fantastic program they put on there. The people up there are so welcoming and friendly. I mean, you would think that you're walking into a family reunion when you go up there. Really good people.
Yeah, they're really good people, no question about it. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into what we've been studying and pick up where we left off. Now, we left off at probably one of the easiest parts of all of that discourse, wouldn't you say? Verse 29. Mm-hmm. So we'll just pick up right there. And now I read out of the New American Standard Bible. This is the 1995 version. And matter of fact, they're supposed to be coming out with a new revision of the NASB here pretty soon if they haven't already done that. So I'm looking forward to that. But now Trent uses the ones that the apostles used.
The sponsored, King James version, sponsored by the apostles.
Right. Well, obviously we say that in jest, but we refer back to that because there's a lot of good things we can see here, and we get a lot of good information looking at both these. Okay, but so this says, but immediately after the tribulation of those days, this is Matthew 24, verse 29. The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Okay, so let's stop right here, and I know that there's a whole lot more information in this section because really it goes through verse 31, but we have to see the time statements. And here's the biggest problem that we've had so often in studying the scriptures. We don't look at the time statements. You see, God told us he was going to do things. If you look at Amos chapter 3 and verse 7, it says, surely the Lord God does nothing without first revealing it to his secret counsel to the prophets. So the Lord tells us when he's going to do things. Matter of fact, this is extremely clear. If you look at Zechariah 12, 13, and 14, the Lord here absolutely just lays it out exactly when these events are going to take place, and we just can't miss it. If you're looking at history, especially if you're living through it, you're just not going to miss it if you're a student of the scriptures. If you're looking for something else, then obviously you will read into the scriptures whatever you want to find. But if we're going to let scriptures interpret scriptures, then we have to look at the time statements. Now, do you see a time statement here in verse 29?
Yeah, basically, it's the first sentence in the verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days.
Yeah. Okay, now let's think back. I know it's been a couple weeks, but let's think back because he said immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now, what tribulation had he just been talking about? Now, this is very important. Otherwise, we're going to put these events someplace that they ought not to be. And I think for the most part, our brethren in the Church of Christ have come to the realization that at the very least, up through verse 5 or 6, depending on who you talk to, they're going to agree that this is the destruction of Jerusalem. However, I remember growing up, do you remember this? That they would teach that this was the destruction of the world.
Yes.
So the Church of Christ has changed its teaching to be more in line with the New Testament gospel truth.
And it's only been more recently in this century. I don't know that there are very many, if any, ministers. There could have been a few here or there, but I'm not aware of them, that taught in the late 1900s, late 20th century, that this was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. I've always heard it was, and always been taught and preached that this was the destruction of the world coming in the future. Yeah.
So scholars today are coming around to the truth that this is, without talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And here's the reason we say this. Verse 29, this time statement. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. Well, what tribulation? The tribulation Jesus was just talking about. So let's back up for just a moment. So before we go forward, we're going to back up. So he talks about this tribulation that he was making mention of in verse 21. He says, there will be a great tribulation such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Now, get your pencil and write down Daniel chapter 12. You can use a pen if you'd like. Daniel chapter 12. Now, the first two verses indicate what this is all talking about in the time period. And when you go through the entire chapter of Daniel 12, we find out without question that all of these events were to be finished when the power of the holy people was shattered. We know that that event took place in 70 at the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So this gives us our time frame. He says when this tribulation is taking place, so he says immediately after, this is verse 29 again, so we've established our time frame, when it's going to happen. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. We just set up the entire rest of our remaining hour here with just these two verses alone. You're talking wheelbarrow loads of information. So we're going to try to work through this and make this as simple as possibly can, because it may be difficult for us because we think in 21st century American terms. This is all that we know. So we hear these signs in the sky. Ooh, we're looking for these things. When in fact, Jesus said when? What was the time statement? These are going to happen in your lifetime. As a matter of fact, just to skip ahead just briefly, verse 34 says, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So Jesus even said, all of these things are going to take place in this generation. So in other words, these people who are alive here will see these things take place. Okay, so let's go back to where we were basing our study. Okay, so the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. What do you get out of that, Trent? What do you think about that one?
It's used in the Old Testament to describe the destruction of a particular city or a nation or a kingdom. Mm-hmm. God used that, and it's really foreign to 21st century Christians because very little time and effort is ever given in studying the Old Testament prophecies. And so when you see this coming up, people literally take that as the actual sun burning in the sky, the moon that is our moon, the stars that you see at night. We don't understand it as being a nation or a kingdom.
Right.
It's all because of you study. People think they can study algebra, first part of the book of algebra, and know everything about algebra there is, or study the last half of the book of algebra and try to figure out the equations and things, and miss it because they don't understand the first bit because they've never studied it. So I guess that's a better description of it.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Just get out, but you try to make ends meet at the rest of it, you can't do it.
Right.
It's confusing to you.
Now, there are lots of places in the Old Testament we go. One that just occurred to me to illustrate how this language is being used. Now, think about this. We use language called idioms. We use certain phrases to mean something else. So we say, like, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. So there's an idiom that if we were to go to another part of the world where there was no grass, guess what they're going to think? They're going to have a clue.
It's raining cats and dogs.
Yeah, raining cats and dogs. They may look up in the sky and say, well, cats and dogs come down from the sky. These are idioms. Well, this is something that humanity has done since day one, and it was no different in the first century. And the writers of the New Testament spoke using the idioms they were familiar with, and using not only that, but the knowledge they were familiar with. And think about this. The New Testament was not written at this point. And all of the New Testament uses this Old Testament language. So let's go back and look at some Old Testament language that helps us understand about these imageries. So we're going to go to Isaiah chapter 66. And there's a few things here that might lend credence to what we're talking about. So this is Isaiah chapter 66. And let's see. Let's start here, verse 14. He says in Isaiah 66, verse 14, "Then you will see this, and your heart will be glad, and your bones will flourish like the new grass, and the hand of the Lord will be made known to his servants, but he will be indignant toward his enemies." Now, this is where it gets good. "For behold, the Lord will come in fire." Whoa. "And his chariots will like the whirlwind, and to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For the Lord will execute judgment by fire, and by his sword on all flesh, and those slain by the Lord will be many. Those who sanctify and purify themselves to go to the gardens following one in the center who eats swine's flesh, detestable things, and mice will come to an end altogether, declares the Lord. Now, wait a minute. That sounds pretty harsh, right? But that's the kind of language that's used. We're going to see some more of this language here as we go on to illustrate to the first century people using language that they knew and they understood, they were familiar with, they'd been taught all their life. These Jewish people have been taught this all their life. So when the Lord used this kind of language back here in the Olivet Discourse, to them they thought, wow, okay, I remember hearing that when I was a child. Maybe they wouldn't have known all of it, but it would have stuck out in their mind that, hey, this is judgment time. This judgment scenario language is what this boils down to. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of background. Like I say, we're not going really extensive into that. So that's this idea of these stars that will fall from the sky, the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And what he's really talking about here, these stars falling, these powers of the heavens being shaken, is simply this Jewish economy, this Jewish way of life, their Jewish law, the Old Covenant, these rulers, these kingdoms, these, how else would you put this?
Well, you said it pretty much all.
Yeah, I kind of ran out of things to describe with. So that's really what he's talking about here. It's not the physical earth being destroyed. It's a spiritual lesson that he's teaching here. Okay. You got anything to add before we go on?
No, go ahead.
Verse? Okay, so verse 30. Now here's where we start seeing things as very physical, and we shouldn't. And like I say, if you've been a member of the Church of Christ and you've been taught these things or raised as I was, I don't know how many generations my family on my dad's side was members of the body of Christ, you just kind of get to where you hear these things and you just accept it and you don't really think much about it. But when we start looking at the Scriptures and seeing what the Scriptures actually say, then there's quite a bit more to deal with. So verse 30, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. What do you think about that?
Well, there's quite a few things there. I've read some things where some scholars have even said that this was not correctly written down, that it should say, and then there shall appear in heaven a sign of the Son of Man.
I have heard that. It just hurts my poor old heart to hear someone try so desperately to explain that away.
And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. Well, last week we talked about the tribes. We're talking about what tribes does the Bible speak about? What tribes?
There's the 12 tribes of Israel.
Right. So this is not some modern day tribe.
Right.
There really aren't any tribes in the world. I mean, you can go to Africa and South America and in China and India and see what people call tribes. All it is just a gathering of people in the nation who have a certain belief. But this is specifically talking about the Jews. Now, this word earth here, in the tribes of the earth mourn, I think if you go back to Isaiah, let's see if we can identify what the earth is here. And I think this will lend credence to Christ talking about Jerusalem. If, let's see here, I wrote down 13 and 14. So
Isaiah 13.
Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong.
We're thinking about, well, Isaiah talks about this day of the Lord. 13 does.
Yeah, it's talking about the sun being darkened and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. But we'll go back to it. I'll go on to something else. I'll find it and I'll catch up.
Were you thinking about 24, about the earth and all that?
Yeah, 24:5.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Isaiah 24.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Isaiah 24:5. It says the earth is defiled. Well, let's go back to the first. Let's go back verse 1 in Isaiah 24. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scatters abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, and with the servant, so with his master, and as with the maid, so with his mistress. as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the taker of usury, so with the giver of usury to him. The land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for the Lord hath spoken this word. The earth mourneth and fadeth away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinances, and broken the everlasting covenant. Well, this is talking about Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
What people were under a covenant with God at the time that Isaiah wrote this?
Only Israel.
Only Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah, only Israel. And
Not
it was
Rome.
under the first
They
covenant.
went around.
Rome was not under covenant with God ever.
Ever.
It's never been. The Gentiles had never been under a covenant with the Lord. It's
Mm-hmm.
always been the Jews. So this is talking specifically about Israel and about the nation of Israel and the power of Israel, the governmental system of Israel being destroyed. What John was talking about back in verse 29. So now, hopefully you can understand that this is not talking about some future event coming to the world or the planet as a whole. It was for a specific time, to a specific people, for a specific reason.
Yeah. And I'm not going to give up on Isaiah 24 just yet. Listen to the language in Isaiah 24.
Sure.
This is crazy, because here he's just talking about the earth and how it's polluted by its inhabitants and so forth. You get to verse 19, it says, the earth is broken asunder. The earth is split through. The earth is shaken violently. The earth reels to and fro like a drunkard, and it totters like a shack. For its transgression is heavy upon it, and it will fall, never to rise again. Doesn't that sound like some kind of physical destruction? Now, if that's the case,
It's covenantal language.
it is. It is. And that is the exact terminology that we use for this. But if this was literal and physical destruction, then that means we shouldn't be here. And Isaiah never would have written this, because it would have been destroyed a long time ago. So we wouldn't be reading this. But it's figurative language. It's symbolic language. And it's meant to describe what's going to happen to the government of Israel and Judah.
Well, in verse 20 it says, and it shall not rise again. Well,
right.
You know, all this effort that's made in these different faiths of Christianity, especially in America, more often than any other parts of the world, that we keep trying to make Israel a nation in the land of Israel, in Tel Aviv. We keep trying to give them back their land. Well, that's going against God's will, because God said they will never rise again as a nation. They were cursed and destroyed in the first century, never to rise again. So if we're going around raising money so that Israel can come and take the land over in Palestine again, that's going against God. They are no longer a nation. They are never to be remembered as a nation again.
Yeah, that's that. Matter Jeremiah 31 talks about that. I'm trying to remember exactly where that's at. About halfway, 3/4 of the way through the chapter.
But you know, these ministers on TV make millions and millions of dollars a year.
Well, fear.
Perpetrating a lie.
Yeah, when you can scare people to death, it's a great motivator to get them to send you some money. And I'm sure that there are some honest individuals in this, but the fact remains, it's not what the scriptures teach. So let's get back to Matthew 24 and the Olivet Discourse. So he talks about here, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Okay.
Used somewhere else too, New Testament?
We see this all over the place. Right. Okay. What are you thinking?
It's Old Testament language.
It is. It is.
Yeah, Isaiah says it.
Isaiah. Matter of fact, let's go to Isaiah again. Chapter 19. So let's see. Can we get somebody in the class to read out aloud for us Isaiah 19, verse 1? I can't hear you. So we'll go ahead and read it. Isaiah 19, verse 1 says, matter of fact, if you want to call in 317-626-5804, we'll let you read it. Go ahead. Trent, you want to give this one a shot? Isaiah 19 and verse 1.
The burden of Egypt, behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it.
Really? So did that physically, bodily, actually happen? No, everybody knows.
Judgment language.
Yeah, it's judgment scenario language. This is. Remember, we talked about those idioms, the ways that they would talk, these things, phraseology that they would use. We did the same thing. So he said that the Lord is going to come riding on this swift cloud, and he's about to come to Egypt. So did Yahweh? I have a lot to say about the term Yahweh. It's so much better, so much more descriptive than God. God, honestly, is a watered-down version of the pagan form of God, because the Jews, at some point, stopped using the proper name of God for fear of saying it in vain. So it just kind of went sideways all from there. Yahweh is the proper name. And that, when I hear that term, it just light up inside, because that's a lot more descriptive and it's a more powerful term about who God is. But I digress. So he says that Yahweh is going to be riding on a swift cloud. Was that literal? I mean, did he literally ride on a swift cloud? I mean, was it shaped like a Harley and he was riding on the cloud down to Egypt?
Instead of asking me, let's ask these futurists, these traditionalists. We say that we're wrong. What does it mean to you? And can you prove what it means to you is true? You know, you go back to Isaiah 12, we're talking about the destruction of Babylon, the first Babylon, not Jerusalem, the second Babylon. And verse 9, Isaiah 12, verse 9, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine.
Isaiah 13.
Isaiah 13, I'm sorry. Isaiah 12 is only 6.
Right.
I'm sorry, guys. Therefore, in verse 13, therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place, and the wrath of the Lord and host in the day of his fierce anger. So when these cities, nations were destroyed, was the earth shaken out of its core? Was the sun darkened? Were the moons were the moon destroyed, exploded? Were the stars burned out? No,
not literally.
So why should we take it literally in the New Testament?
Let me show you something pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you just read how many verses? 7 or 8?
Yeah,
like that?
About 4 or 5.
Okay, and then there was actually more that he could have read that would make things more descriptive. So he could have read pretty much the entire chapter here. Now, notice in verse 6 what term is used. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. This is Isaiah 13, verse 6.
I mean, it's not Sunday morning.
Right. Okay, so he says, wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It's not Sunday morning. Trent's got that right. Okay, but let's think about this. So he uses this one term, and he implants in their mind what the day of the Lord is that's near. Judgment. It's all of these things that Trent just read. So all he had to do was use one term, and then in their minds they would go, oh yeah, okay, this should be the very same thing as us saying, wow, that is awesome. Of course, I'm a child of the 80s, so awesome to me might mean something different than it does other people. But so when I hear the term awesome, in my mind, it just is one word to describe this long list of adjectives of great and wonderful and powerful and awesome and cool things. But it only takes one phrase to explain that. So in the New Testament, when the Jews heard this term, the day of the Lord, what did they think? Something that was new and different coming in the future? Or was it what they had already been taught? The one phrase described to them what the day of the Lord was, this judgment scenario, this spiritual judgment scenario, not physical. The Yahweh did not come, God did not come physically riding on a Harley-shaped cloud or a chariot-shaped or a horse-shaped cloud. It was spiritual language to describe the scene. Just that simple. Okay, so we're back in Matthew 24. Okay, so there's something else here that we need to look at. So we're back to Matthew 24 and verse 30. The sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Okay, so he says this sign's going to appear. We've been talking about these signs. He had already talked about these signs, things that were going to take place up to this point. So did those things happen? I think they did.
I know they did. God said they would, and they did.
That's right. Now, what I'm getting...
Whether I believe it or not.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. Whether we believe it or not, the truth is the truth. Okay, so what I'm getting ready to tell you is going to be very dangerous. We were on a mission here, and should you choose to accept it, if you get caught, we will disavow. No, I'm just kidding. Mission impossible. Okay, here's the mission. You're going to do something that you may not like, but it's the absolute truth. But even if this isn't true, the scriptures teach us what is right. So if history doesn't verify that, then history is wrong, not the scriptures. And so many people do it the other way around. Most of our brethren actually look to history to verify their belief before they ever do the scriptures. They got it backwards. But the scriptures teach us to trust them. Jesus, I trust Jesus at his word. This is just the simplest way I know how to put it. So, what about these signs? Josephus lived in the 1st century, and he saw the destruction of Jerusalem. He was there. He was a part of it, actually. He was...
Tacitus.
Yep, and Tacitus would have been a pagan historian, Josephus being Jewish. They record that in, I think it's Iyar, the month Iyar or something like that, June or July, August, something in that range, that there were signs in the sky above Jerusalem. There were there were chariots, men in these chariots and on these horses dressed with swords, and they were dressed for battle. Matter of fact, Trent, why don't you say that? But let me see if I can find this. I think I've got this quote here, and I'll just read this to you as soon as we can find it. I'm gonna let Trent take this here for a minute while I look this up.
Yeah, the verse 30, the Son of Man in heaven, or the sign that Christ is ruling in heaven, was the fact that these up in the clouds, these armies could be seen, and it would sit there for a period of time. And there was also a strange event that happened within the temple at that time.
Oh yeah, lots of... Yeah, that's an excellent point.
And just these extraordinary things that you could not deny it came from God. It came only from God. As a matter of fact, when the Jews were being attacked by the Romans were hurling these 100-pound rocks across the walls because they couldn't penetrate through them. And these 100-pound rocks were white, and the Jews, the watchmen on the walls, would yell, "The Lord is coming!" When they would catapult these rocks across the walls, they would yell, "God is coming! God is coming!" because they knew they were being judged.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not the one I was looking for. It would have been during the second Passover in 66. That would have been... here's a few things that these historians relate to us. These signs that were taking place. Now, again, trust me, I am not putting my stock into what the scriptures say, verified by history. I'm putting stock into what the scriptures say, and history just verifies that. So we got to keep this correct. There was this phenomena that took place in the skies above Jerusalem. There was a star resembling a sword, a comet, would have been Halley's comet, a bright light shining around the altar and the temple, a vision of chariots and soldiers running around among the clouds and all the cities of Palestine, a quaking, a great noise, and the sounds of a great multitude saying, "Let us remove hence." That's what Trent was just talking about. And
yeah, I can guess something else that might help too.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this is from Josephus. This is called the Jewish Wars, book 6, chapter 5, verse 3, if you want to call that. It says, "A supernatural apparition was seen, too amazing to be believed. What I am now to relate would, I imagine, be dismissed as imaginary. Had this not been vouched by eyewitnesses, then followed by subsequent disasters that deserve to be thus signalized. For before sunset, chariots were seen in the air over the whole country, and the armed battalions speeding through the clouds and encircling the cities." And here's something else too. Tacitus, he records it too.
Yeah.
If you want me to read that.
Yeah, definitely.
this is what Tacitus said. He's a Roman historian. He said prodigies had occurred, but their expiation by the offering of victims or solemn vows is held to be unlawful by a nation which is the slave of superstition and the enemy of true beliefs. In the sky appeared a vision of armies in conflict of glittering armor. A sudden lightning flash from the clouds lit up the temple. The doors of the holy place abruptly opened. A superhuman voice was heard to declare that the gods were leaving it. Instant came the rushing tumult of their departure. Few people placed a sinister interpretation upon this. The majority were convinced that the ancient scriptures of their priests alluded to the present as the very time when the Orient would triumph and from Judea would go forth men destined to rule the world. And that's in his book, Histories, book 5, verse 13.
This is powerful stuff. So the prophecy was made here by Jesus in the 24th chapter of Matthew. And here we see fulfillment in history. It verifies exactly what Jesus said. Now, if we never had that recorded in history, then would that make any difference? No, because the scriptures teach what they teach, and we would have to take it on faith, and which we do.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you too.
No, go ahead.
Here's another thing that Josephus had written, which proves beyond a shadow of doubt that the harlot in Babylon, spoken of in the book of Revelation, was Jerusalem, was Israel. Josephus wrote and said this: no other city ever suffered such miseries, nor was there ever a generation more fruitful in wickedness from the beginning of the world. We see all of this played out already in what we've read and studied in Matthew 24.
Yeah.
In reality, it was God who condemned the whole nation and turned every course that was taken for their preservation to their destruction. The multitudes of those who perished exceeded all the destructions that man or God ever brought upon the world. So that's why it says that such as never was before and never will be again.
The Jews in the first century, especially those who were honest and sincere, and especially those Christians, they understood what was taking place. Matter of fact, history records that actually about 60,000 of them, I know there are reports, or some theologians say more, much less, but either way, history records that there were those who actually left the city because they listened to the Lord and they did what he said. So sign after sign after sign after sign that we can verify in history. But the scriptures said these things. So we look through the scriptures and we see that Jesus said what was going to take place, and guess what happened? It took place. And if we try to deny that, or we try to explain it away, then we're trying to explain away the very words of Jesus and his prophecies. And when we do that, we deny the testimony of Jesus. Revelation 19:10 teaches us that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So this prophecy fulfilled proves that Jesus was who he said. And if he made a prophecy and it did not come true, guess what? Deuteronomy 18 applies. Don't listen to him. He's not a prophet. He's just a bag of hot air. So,
well, let's go back and look. When Josephus said that they were a generation of wickedness that had never been seen on the earth, well, I believe that. The reason why I believe that is because they killed the very Son of God.
That's exactly
You cannot commit a more heinous sin than killing the very Son of God, who was your king.
Amen. It doesn't get any worse than that, folks. So what can we do in the future that's actually worse than rejecting and murdering the Son of God?
You can reject Christ, but to murder him is another thing.
Yeah. Reject him in the flesh. There he is in front of you. This is what the unpardonable sin is talking about in Matthew 12, by the way, briefly. The reason you couldn't be forgiven is the same reason that Pharaoh had such a hard time, because his heart was hardened to see these miracles right in front of your face and then to flatly deny the power of God in them. How can he be saved in that? So that's what that unpardonable sin was talking about in Matthew 12. Okay, so we're talking about these from Matthew 24 and the Olivet Discourse. There about verse 30, these signs of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. We talked about the tribes of the earth. they are these 12 tribes. They were dispersed and scattered abroad according to prophecy. Peter wrote to the 12 tribes dispersed, right, in 1 Peter 1. James writes to the 12 tribes that were dispersed abroad in James 1:1.
Peter wrote to the 12 tribes dispersed in both 1st and 2nd Peter.
1st and 2nd Peter.
It was not written to a Jew, as futurists like to claim.
Right.
Some of the things that come out of these futurists,
well, it
shocks me.
You have to come up with this stuff to explain all this away, rather than just accept the truth right there in front of you. Okay, so let's talk about not the 12 tribes, but he says, then they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Let's talk about this power and great glory and Jesus being seen. And as he puts it, he says, they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Can you think of any other place where this passage, or where a passage similar to this is used? The same language, same meaning, actually. Well, I can. It would be Matthew chapter 16. And let's go over here and look at this. Matthew 16. This is verse 27 and 28. Now, notice what verse 27 says. This is Matthew 16, verse 27. The Son of Man is going to, a New American Standard. We're going to talk about a couple words that are incorrectly translated here, but we'll go ahead and read it. The Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. Now, one thing I can promise you simply by reading this translation is there's a telltale here about the theology of the translators. Simply put, they added some words or changed some words around here to fit their theology, and it's this going to. So they said the Son of Man is going to. Well, that's very watered down theology, because the word here is mellow in the present indicative. And you can look this up, and mellow means about to. So here's what this says, and you see the difference between going to and about to. Going to can be a far distant futurish thing. About to places it within a specific close time period. So if we read it as it should be, for the Son of Man is about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. This is something that fits with all the other things that he said. It's going to happen in their lifetime. He's getting ready to say that again. So here's what he says. I'm getting ready to come back and judge everybody. And then the just will be rewarded for their deeds, and the unjust will be rewarded for their deeds. Is that not what that's saying, or is it?
That's exactly what it's saying.
Yeah.
To think of it in any other way, you would have to be taught wrong.
So, talking with a preacher in the Church of Christ today, he's been preaching for 40 years, and he tells me that this means the destruction of Jerusalem. I said, okay, so you're willing to admit or go that route that says that at the destruction of Jerusalem, the great white throne judgment scene of Revelation 20 is right here in front of us, and it happened at Jerusalem. You're really, or at Pentecost rather, and you're really willing to say that? He said, absolutely. Well, he didn't say he would be willing to say that about Revelation 21, but he said this was judgment that occurred, but it wasn't the final judgment. So I'm just thinking, where is that in this passage?
That gets me. See, the Church of Christ, they make it their mission to go through other faiths of Christianity and point fingers at them for adding words to the Bible that are not there, or taking words away that are not in the Bible, and they make a mockery of these congregations and these other faiths of Christianity. But when you look at the futurists' view of this and the traditionalist view, that's exactly what they do. They add words in like final judgment, the final resurrection, words that are not used together in the Bible. And
redefining terms.
I mean, a hypocrite is a hypocrite. I mean, it's proven out to be every day, isn't it?
They redefine terms, and they accuse us of this an awful lot, actually. But we're not redefining terms. We're just looking at what the scriptures have to say, and we're taking Jesus at his word. That's the bottom line in all this.
The main thing is let Scripture define Scripture.
Right. Scripture interprets Scripture. Okay, so let's keep looking here at Matthew 16, because this is the same language that Jesus used in the Olivet Discourse, just a few pages further in your Bible. So Matthew 16:27 says he is about to come in the glory of his Father. Well, what's the glory of his Father? You ever ask yourself that question? What do you think the glory of
No,
his
people
Father?
don't have to ask themselves that question, because all they got to do is say something to the minister and he'll tell them what they should believe.
Yeah, but we're not going to do that. Got a bunch of hearts out of that one.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you did. Okay, so what's the glory of the Father? Well, there's a passage that we already used. I'm going to use this again, Isaiah chapter 19. Now, notice here the glory of the Father. What did he do? When he came in judgment on Egypt, guess what he did? Isaiah 19, verse 1 says that the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. So what was his glory? He was coming on a cloud. Now, in Acts chapter 1 at the ascension, what did those men dressed in white say to the apostles as they were standing there in that private venue, by the way, just the apostles, Jesus, and those two men in white? What did they say when the apostles were standing there gazing upward? Remember what they said?
Yeah, he told them that Christ would come again in like manner, that they saw him go into heaven. He was received out of their sight into heaven. So if in like manner, if he's coming and he's received out of their sight in a cloud, he's going to come out of their sight in a cloud. That's like manner that he left, right?
Right. Yeah. Jesus said it this way: I'm going to come in the glory of my Father. When Yahweh came in glory and in judgment, when he made his appearance, so to speak, what was it?
In
Clouds. Every time he appeared in a cloud on the Mount
Mount Sinai.
There you go, on Mount Sinai. He covered the whole mountain, at least the whole top of it. During the meeting times and tabernacle and so forth, guess what filled this place with the glory of the Lord?
The Feast of Atonement.
It was a cloud.
Feast of Atonement. It happens once a year, at the fall of the year, and the high priest would go in there just at one time a year to offer this Feast of Atonement. When God would come down to accept that sacrifice, he would fill the room with the cloud of his glory.
Mm-hmm. Now remember, if you have been with us the whole time, we've been talking about how these people writing in the first century would use the language that they were familiar with, this religious training. They understood what cloud comings meant. They understood what the glory of Yahweh meant, and it was always associated with these clouds. So when Jesus spoke this in Matthew 16, verse 27, he said, I am about to come the glory of my Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. He's talking about the judgment day. Has to be. He's coming with his angels. He's coming in the glory of his Father. And this is the judgment of the just and the unjust. Well, when was this judgment of the just and the unjust supposed to take place? At the end of the age, right? That's exactly what Daniel says.
Yeah, that's what Christ said too, at the end of the age.
The end of the age. Well, what's the end of the age? And what age is he talking about?
It's the age of the Mosaic law.
That's right. It was the end of the law of Moses.
It was still
when it was
present
shattered
in the world at the writing of Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
Hebrews 13:8.
Absolutely was. Because the power of the holy people had not yet been shattered. So what is the power of the holy people according to Daniel 12, when all of these events were to take place, where the judgment of the just and the unjust was to take place, where the Lord was to return, the resurrection? When are all these things supposed to take place according to Daniel? Can't be at the time of the Maccabean revolt. It's impossible. If that's the case, then it would all have been done and complete there. So that's not a valid argument at all.
Yeah, Matthew 5:17 and 18 pretty much spells out the way things work with God. That nothing is just taken away; it has to be fulfilled, and then it goes away. In Matthew 5:17, Christ said to his disciples, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law." What law was that? The Mosaic law,
right?
Or the prophets of God. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. So what is it saying? Just take out the idea of heaven and earth. Just take that out. What is it saying? It's saying that not even the least of the law will go unfulfilled.
Yeah.
Not the very least of the law, not even the dotting of an I in American language or the crossing of a T will be forgotten, will be left out in that law. It's all going to be fulfilled. Part of the law, the Mosaic law, was the penalties. If you sin, the penalties that you paid for sin, and then the penalties that you had to pay for individual sin, the sin that you had to pay for the penalties of the nation of Israel, the sins that you paid for that were paid for the sins of the chief priests, and so what you're saying today is that God nullified all of that. God doesn't nullify that. Christ fulfilled it. And part of the Mosaic law, the statutory part or the penal part of it, was that Jerusalem in Deuteronomy and Leviticus were told that you were going to be destroyed as a nation to be remembered no more ever again for your going about and whoring and becoming a harlot because you broke the covenant with your Lord, with God. You became a harlot. He was married to them. So it was not fulfilled. All the law had not been fulfilled until 70 AD when God destroyed the nation of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the law had to be in effect in some extent from AD 30 to AD 70. It had to be. Or God and Christ both are a liar. And if they're a liar, then our faith is no good. We might as well be a Muslim.
No, I don't want to go that far.
Well,
but you're right. You're right about
even a Muslim will tell you that the law stays in effect until it's fulfilled.
Yeah, it just doesn't come to an abrupt end. It has to come to its completion, and that's exactly what many Old Testament scriptures teach us. Okay, so here we are back at
Matthew 24.
Matthew 24,
verse 30.
Yeah, verse 30. So we've illustrated here that Jesus is going to come in the glory of his Father. His Father came in clouds. Jesus was, the men in white at the ascension in Acts 1, 9 through 11, I think it is, said he's going to come back in the same manner that he left. Jesus already told us what that was. They were just reminding everybody standing there, remember what Jesus said? He's coming back just the way he's leaving, in a cloud. They would have understood this through their idioms, their language, their understanding, their knowledge, their upbringing.
Yes, to help you people understand this, go to Leviticus 13, I believe, and you can go ahead and talk about what you're talking. I think it's Leviticus 13 and Leviticus. I can't even say that. I have a hard time pronouncing that word. My tongue gets tied up.
I wonder why.
I think it's 13. It talks about the penalties. Or is it 26?
Yeah, I'm not sure on this one.
Yeah, it's 26. Read the chapter 26. Read chapter 26.
The whole chapter?
Yeah, we don't do it tonight, but read on your own.
I was going to say, yeah, we're almost out of time.
Read the penalties for individual sin, for corporate sin, and you find out that it was not fulfilled until 70 AD.
Mm-hmm. And Zechariah, Jeremiah, all of these prophets make this case for these things to take place. Daniel's the clearest, without question. Daniel just lays it out. The last 10, 11, and 12, these last three chapters anyway of Daniel, lay out this time period of what, roughly 500 years or so, 490, whatever it works out to be. And every kingdom that's going to exist from the time of Daniel's writing to the time Messiah comes and works his messianic work and completes and finishes all of these things, as the 12th chapter says. And it unfolded exactly the way Daniel said. And history verifies that. We, of course, through faith, we believe that it happened. But thankfully and luckily, history does verify this to a T. So it's amazing how this works. No gap theory, by the way. If you're
Leviticus chapter 16, Leviticus chapter 16, all the way through, goes on.
The end of the chapter, or the end of the book?
Basically, chapter 26.
So here's where we're at with this now. So we've looked at these two verses essentially, and here's what we pulled out of this. This time period is without question, Jesus has emphasized this and then re-emphasized it. In classic Jewish tradition, the way they would speak and write, it's called doubling or paralleling. And he said it in verse 21. This is when it's going to happen. Here's the tribulation. Here's this great tribulation that such as, and he's quoting Daniel 12, that has never occurred since the beginning of the world. And then he adds, never will again.
And
So
Josephus backed that up.
that's absolutely right. And the reason it'll never happen again is because Jerusalem has been totally wiped out. There is nothing left of the original city. It was literally became a tell. It just mounded over with dirt, and they built another city on top of it. So this, what you see today, is not the city that was there to begin with. So he says it's never going to happen again. Then in verse 29, he says, he makes reference to that tribulation again. When's that supposed to happen? In our future? No. It was in their future, but not ours, because it was fulfilled in the lifetime of those standing there, as we read in verse 34. These things will happen to this generation. Now, what we're going to see, and we're really running out of time.
Please don't let anybody. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
This is important.
I need
When you get to verse 34, and someone tells you that generation can mean any generation,
it's such a cop-out.
give them a grammar lesson, and take them to a dictionary, and take them to a concordance, and then ask them again what a generation is. My Lord, I've heard so many arguments. It means contemporary, so those people living at that time. That's what it means.
Mm-hmm. And you just made me remember something. I didn't finish making my point from Matthew 16 because verse 27 we established it's about to happen. It's the great white throne judgment scene, the just and the unjust. Daniel 12, and then verse 28 he says, "Truly I say to you, there are some of those standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." So he says these events are going to take place. This judgment is going to take place, and some of you are not going to die until you see it happen. That's the same language that's used in Matthew 24.
Yeah, the argument there is that that's the day of Pentecost, and that is such a ridiculous argument. That's just throwing anything at a dartboard and hoping it's going to stick.
Yeah, it doesn't hold weight. It really is just kind of a Hail Mary pass and hope somebody catches it, or rather hope somebody doesn't notice, I guess.
Hail Mary pass is that there's at least somebody down at the end zone that's got a chance to catch it. This has no truth in it whatsoever.
Well, yeah, you're right. Yeah, the reason this cannot be Pentecost, you're really going to have to place the judgment, the great white judgment throne scene at Pentecost. You're going to have to say that the kingdom came with power and great glory. Now, if that's the case, then why were the Gentiles not admitted until about 10 years, 12 years later? Well, that's really powerful, isn't it? If only the Jews can be saved.
That means the prophets were wrong again. So there you go.
Means the prophets were wrong. Okay, so what about this? The kingdom came with power and great glory, and not one word had been put to a scroll of the new covenant. Not one word.
It's amazing.
So there's just a lot of things that don't fit this. And when we try to take the scriptures and make them say something that they don't, you come up with this system, this theology that a lot of people love, but it's just not right. And a lot of people have believed this for many, many years and never questioned it.
Again, my offer stands. Send me we'll do a quick, clean deed. I'll take you can sign over your card to me, your retirement, your IRA, your 401k. I'll be glad to accept it.
I hate to laugh about it.
I'll have a good time after you're gone, I guess. I mean, come on, let's put our money where our mouth is. We say these things, and then you ridicule people who try to show you the truth. Well, no, put your money where your mouth is. Or are you just a bully? Which one is it?
Well, here's...
you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know. Not the people that are... Unless one particular guy's listening. But not the good people that are listening to us right now. Since we're running out of time, I'm going to wrap this up here. What we've been talking about, we'll pick up here about where we're at, verse 32, something like that.
All right, yeah, we'll start at verse 30, 31, 32.
Yeah, okay, so we're starting this area again next week. So to wrap this up, what we're talking about is the gospel truth. This is the gospel that they understood in the first century. And yes, eschatology, the end time things, are part of that. And they understood this to be happening in their future in the first century. In their future, not beyond their future, because Jesus told them it was going to happen in their lifetime. And we've already read that many times already in this study here tonight. But I want to point out a passage to you that helps to illustrate this. This is in Ephesians chapter 3. Everything we've been talking about here tonight is for one purpose. And you know what that is? That's to save the soul of a sinner. That's exactly what this is all about. This is God's eternal, it's God's eternal purpose. So we'll kind of abbreviate this since we're running really short on time, but verse 9 to verse 8 of Ephesians 3, Paul says, "To me, the very least of all saints, this grace was given to preach to the Gentiles the unfathomable riches of Christ, and to bring to light what is the administration of the mystery, which for ages has been hidden in God who created all things, so that the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known through the church to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. This was in accordance with the eternal purpose which he carried out in Christ Jesus our Lord." Now, that's what this is all about. So everything that Trent and I have been talking about here today and presenting to anyone who's willing to listen is this gospel of Jesus Christ as preached in the first century, the way they would have understood it. Not the way we want to understand it, but the way we should understand it. And that's the bottom line. So the big question is, you've listened to all these things. What are you going to do with the truth that you hear? Just ignore it? Or are you going to do something about it? Most people will die in the condition that they're in this very moment because they lack the strength to change for whatever reason. Usually it's family. It could be monetary. There's lots of reasons. But they refuse to change. But there are those few. And Jesus said they're precious, but they're few who have an open and an honest heart, who are willing to change when they see the truth in front of them. And here it is. So I hope you've been edified this evening, and we look forward to being with you again next week. Any closing words?
No, you said pretty much.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence. Okay. So be with us next week, same time. We'll be here at 8 o'clock. And don't forget to come and visit us when you're in Indianapolis. We would love to have you at the Westside Church of Christ, 2675 Kentucky Avenue. We thank you very much for your study with us this evening. And don't you forget, study to show yourself approved. Thank you.